for the $20 super chat. And thank you so much, Ira. Trump is pumping faking. Trump is pump faking about Iran if he attacks Iran. That is a conflict of interest for Russia. Xi already pulled Trump's whole card on Taiwan.
That's going nowhere. That is not how this works. The main thing with Taiwan is China says they're going to take it starting 2027. They'll be ready. And the U.S. has got itself in a bad position, giving away munitions to Ukraine and Israel. And it's frankly run out of the heavy artillery ammunition that it needs. And it has been neglecting the Marine Corps for decades, and they don't really have adequate transportation to get to where they need. And you certainly can't move large army divisions, nor the heavy equipment that they need in time to do anything about it. And Taiwan is about 180 to 190 to 200 seconds from the nearest set of airfields in mainland China. So count to 120, and you can get a modern attack aircraft from the takeoff bases in mainland China in that 220 counts that you count. And that's not good for anybody trying to resist them, especially since we're short on aircraft carriers. And China has come up with some standoff missiles that might make it prudent for the U.S. Navy to stay at a distance other than with Arleigh Burke destroyers, which are kind of old and decrepit because they are a 1970 design that they started making in 1982, which is 43 years ago. So we haven't advanced in because we've been shortchanging the Department of Defense. So we're going to pay for it. So we need diplomacy to get ourselves out of this mess.
Supreme Court requires non-citizens to challenge detention and removal in Texas, right? So, well, I think this one is better. Supreme Court clears way for Venezuelan deportation to resume for, well, this says for now, of course, because it's the New York Times. So Trump got a win today because
because nobody challenged him with standing to challenge him.
So the Supreme Court on Monday lifted a pair of orders by a federal judge in Washington, D.C. that had barred the government from removing non-citizens who are designated as members of the Venezuelan gang under a March 15th executive order issued by President Trump. By a vote 5-4, the justices declined to address the challengers' contention that they are not covered by the 18th century law on which Trump relied in issuing the order. Instead, the challengers' lawsuit must be brought in Texas, where they are being held, rather than in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
The unsigned 4-page opinion emphasized that although courts have a limited role in reviewing claims under the law, the plaintiffs and other detained under the law are entitled to notice and an opportunity to challenge their removal. Justice Sotomayor penned a 17-page dissent, joined in by Justices Kagan and Jackson, and in part by Justice Amy Barrett. She contended that her colleague's decision to intervene in this litigation is as inexplicable as it is dangerous.
Well, here's what the thing is. That's okay. Back to Diddy again. What happened relative to those charges that gave a federal district court in New York the jurisdiction for things that they raided his mansions in Florida and California for? See, in other words, this is something that needs to be cleaned up where the feds can cherry pick which jurisdiction they want to go after somebody in. That's wrong. The other thing is that if this had been a habeas corpus and each person had been named individually. That's one thing. But in criminal law, you just can't have a third party come in and say, we're going to represent all of these people and it's wrong to let go. The defendant has to respond and raise the claim. That's not what happened. We don't have a bunch of gang members who raised the claim. We are in the individual or specified group. We have some people that intervened way outside, 1,500 miles away in New York, and said, on the East Coast, and said they shouldn't be allowed to take these people out. Well, since it's a criminal matter, in essence, where they broke the law to get in to the border, and through the border, they got caught by what they call an elastic border. It's like it's made like a rubber band. Just because you cross the line doesn't mean that you cross the border, because that rubber band stretches and it can snap back and bring you back. And the issue is, how'd you get in here? And if you're undocumented, you have no business being here. So rather than go through charging you with a crime, we just send you back where you came from. That doesn't require all of this. You see, I think Bondi made a mistake by characterizing these folk as dangerous and they're criminals. Where when you accuse somebody of criminality, you've got to prove it. And when you have something to prove, then due process of law applies. All you had to do is say they were trying to break the border. We caught them, we rounded them up, and they aren't American citizens. They have no legitimate reason to be here. So all we have to do is show the probable cause that they are here illegally, and we get to boot them back to where they came from. That would have been the end of it. But no, they had to go elaborate for PR purposes and say, hey,
Yeah.
boy. Anyway, points made. Um,
All right. So getting back to the Supreme Court, he got a win when it comes to the illegals, and the Supreme Court sided with him.
yeah, it's inevitable. If you apply the law like I have for a very long time, the conclusion is inescapable. And I'm surprised that even there was a four members of the opposition. I don't see what basis they could have had. It's like, what standing did the people have to bring the action in the first place? One. Two, why did they bring it where they did instead of the location where this occurred? And three, why is it they don't have a single one of the people who was impacted actually filed some kind of complaint demanding due process of law? It's something that goes to an individual when there's a criminal charge. Now, on a habeas corpus, that means somebody's held in detention. These people aren't or weren't being held in detention. They were being deported, not for violations, but because they weren't supposed to be here. So they had no standing. As soon as they established probable cause that these people were not here with a legal claim of a lawful passage into the country. So the decision was inevitable. In other words, hey, not now.
Speaking of the Bill of Rights, I want to share this because I think what this particular man said was so idiotic. And I'm not sure exactly. I know he goes on like these news talk show hosts or whatever. I think he's some type of college educator. I don't know, but he's an idiot. Ellie Mystall or whatever.
South Africa got over apartheid. Did they just go back to their Afrikaner racist constitution and be like, oh, we just need a couple of amendments. We just need a couple of changes here to make it work? No, they threw the whole thing out and started again, this time asking everybody.
Wow.
This time having a completely new delegation of all of the people of South Africa, not just the white folks, but not no white folks. And they came up with a new constitution. It's one of the reasons why the South African Constitution is generally thought of as one of the best constitutions in the world. And ours continues to be a piece of crap.
So what laws would you kick out immediately? What laws are you saying it needs to get the fuck out of here?
Yeah, so the first one I have in my book is that I want to eliminate every single voter registration law. All of them.
Did you hear that?
Yeah, where has this fool been? They have all kinds of violations. See, this is one of those stupid little points that the woke folk jump on. Oh my God, he's so right. Yeah, but what about all these illegals they were trafficking into the country so that they could come up and with no voter registration, anybody could vote? No, you don't want everybody voting. It's bad enough since they've got universal suffrage. You have too many ignorant and stupid people that do not spend enough time apprising themselves of what the issues are, forget the facts, and they respond to a bunch of idiots out in front of a polling place doing a line dance, or what was it a few years ago? Take your booties to the poll.
Well, great show. I see another super chat, couple of super chats. Thank you. E. Todd says, Judge Brown, if the judge wanting to keep these Venezuelans gang members is buddies with Justin Roberts, shouldn't he recuse himself?
He might, but that's not what the issue is. I don't support what he did. I think it's wrong, but it's called error. You cannot impeach or remove a judge or somebody on a court of appeals, a justice, for error. That's why they have appellate courts to reverse error that is harmful. Now, I will call attention to this. A couple of years ago, some of us who were strongly supportive of the Second Amendment became very offended when the Biden administration, with the contrivance of ATF, started changing the law on pistols with braces. Braces were something that constitute a fairly recent invention, and the intention was to take all of these people with disabilities, particularly vets, and give them some way to stabilize a firearm so they could exercise their Second Amendment right. Well, after saying that these firearms, which were stabilized with these braces, were okay for years, the Biden administration flipped the script with their ATF and they said they're illegal. So you either have to destroy them or we confiscate them. So people offended by this, specific individuals, specific plaintiffs, that is, backed up by the NRA and other organizations that are there to protect the Second Amendment, they went into court and they got judges on circuit courts, specifically in Texas, to enjoin the Biden administration and the ATF. Now, what's happened since then is the Trump administration has taken these cases that the Biden administration appealed and said, we're dismissing the government's appeal. So we applauded these district court trial judges for enjoining the Biden administration and ATF from violating the Constitution. Well, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. So that authority exists, and sometimes you may have a liberal judge who exercises it appropriately, and that becomes error. But we should not be talking about he needs to be impeached because he dared to do it. The case that sets this whole thing in play is called Marbury versus Madison from 1803, which is 222 years ago. It stands for the principle that a court with appropriate jurisdiction may declare some act of another governmental entity unconstitutional and inappropriate and invalid. Now, we
I got
have what we call Article 3 judges. The only court that's set up by the Constitution of the United States is the Supreme Court of the United States. Under Article 3, Congress is given the authority and the power to authorize and fund and establish inferior courts that lead up to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court won't hear every case that wants to get itself in front. They have to apply for and file a petition for a writ of certiorari. In other words, a certification that the issue that is raised by the matter on appeal is important enough for the U.S. Supreme Court to consider it. If they do, they issue the writ of certiorari and they hear the case. So what happens is the many cases are vetted until only the most important ones that decide crucial aspects of the law that are in dispute. And in the 10 appellate circuits that we have, are not resolved the same way. So we devolve this onto the Supreme Court to make the final decision. Now, there is no stipulation in the Constitution as to how many members are supposed to be on the Supreme Court. That's up to Congress. There was talk of increasing the number of members of the Supreme Court so that Biden administration policies could get favor. But we have tried in our history more than 9. It proved to be unwieldy, and they went back to 9, and that's been going on basically for the 200. And let's see, how long has it been? 36 years since the nation has existed, because it works. Anything less is not really good, and anything more is not good either. We've had the experience. So, as the first case, this is one more thing. First case decided by the U.S. Supreme Court is this: what is the common law? The Supreme Court held unanimously that all law in the United States is common law until it is superseded by legislative action. What is the common law? That body of judge-made law based on tradition, precedent, and the evolving conditions of society. So we have a 236-year-old precedent that some people want to throw out of the window, and that's not the way to do it. Back to the case at hand, what we have is precedent, a long ancient precedent, and we need to stick with them because we cannot have the improvident situation of people get to change the law to push their particular agendas. It doesn't work that way, not in this country.